I hereby open the commencement exercises of St. Vladimir's Theological Seminary for the mid-year commencement 2024 to 2025.
Please sit. Good evening, esteemed guests, faculty, staff, students, and friends. Welcome to St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, and welcome to the 42nd Annual Schmemann Lecture, a joyous tribute to our beloved former dean on this great feast of the three hierarchs. This lecture honors his remarkable legacy. It provides a platform for theological learning that exemplifies both academic excellence and spiritual richness. And thanks to all of you, it brings together our vibrant community, both here in person and joining us virtually, with a wonderful turnout online in the hundreds. We're especially honored to welcome His Beatitude Metropolitan Tikhon, Primate of the Orthodox Church in America, His Grace Bishop Irinei, Bishop of Washington, New York, and Eastern America, representatives from St. Nurse's Seminary, and all the other special guests here with us tonight. Special thanks to friends from Yale University, Fordham University, and City University of New York. We extend a warm welcome to those joining us virtually, including Father Jeremy Davis, Executive Chair of our board, Mr. Jeffrey Hoff, Chair of the Transition Committee, our dedicated trustees, and our esteemed emeriti trustees. Thank you for your continued service, dedication, and investment in our seminary. Your commitment to theological education and the spiritual formation of future clergy, lay leaders, and scholars is essential to fulfilling our vital mission to the Church. A special welcome also to the newest members of our seminary team who joined just a few weeks ago. Father Alexander Entel, our full-time faculty member as Assistant Professor of Canon Law, who also serves as Rector of the Three Hierarchs Chapel and Chief Operations Officer, and Mr. Peter Kopcha, our new Chief Financial Officer. The presence of these new senior spiritual and operational leaders represents a milestone building on the noteworthy successes we have seen recently, namely renewing our campus culture and strengthening the operational and financial foundations of our beloved institution. With a renewed commitment to financial transparency, I am delighted to share some pivotal recent achievements. When I stepped into serving this institution as interim president following Father Chad Hatfield's retirement, we were woefully struggling with an annual deficit exceeding $2 million. St. Vladimir Seminary had to creatively transform the ways we serve our students and our mission, while also transforming our finances dramatically and demonstrating financial strength and stability. I am pleased to say that at the end of the calendar year, we swung the pendulum the other way and had a cash surplus of $100,000. This remarkable turnaround achieved in such a short time is a testament to the power of our spirit of working collaboratively as a team of colleagues for our mission. Our accreditors, the Association of Theological Schools, who visited us recently, were very impressed and commended us for our progress, current success, and prospects for the future. This represents an unprecedented milestone for us, a testament to the strength and resilience of our community, especially after transformative progress, especially after a period of intense challenges. It is a privilege for me to share news of this transformative progress and renewed beginnings with you, our students, alumni, donors, hierarchs, supporters, and friends, and to celebrate the opportunities that lie ahead. St. Vladimir now stands on a fresh, newly laid foundation, built on the bedrock of Christ's Church and our rich legacy and tradition of our historic Crestwood campus. Father Schmemann's visionary leadership shaped Orthodox Christianity in America. As dean, he cultivated a vibrant intellectual community, inspiring generations. We are eager to focus vigilantly on the student experience, and I and my colleagues humbly serve the Church following in his footsteps. We carry this beautiful torch forward as we renew our seminary, honoring cherished tradition like this lecture while prayerfully working towards an even brighter future. Tonight, we are blessed to have with us Dr. Henry Maguire. a renowned scholar of Byzantine art, and his wife, Dr. Eunice Maguire. We accept with gratitude their magnanimous visit and financial generosity to our seminary. Thank you and welcome. And we have the beautiful occasion tonight, not only to hear from Professor Maguire, but also we are going to bestow upon him a honorary degree. So here I am to read a citation in honor of Professor Maguire. A teacher, doctoral advisor, a world-class scholar of Byzantine art history, rhetoric, theology, and culture, you are, as Michael Psellos would have put it, a great vine whose fruits are bountiful beyond compare and contest. Born in a misty and perhaps even mystical lands of Great Britain, you were raised to be adventurous, inquisitive, and studious. You attended Cambridge and Harvard universities, where you mastered the visual and literary languages of the language of the Byzantines. You taught and generously advised undergraduate and graduate students at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and Johns Hopkins University. Between 1991 and 1996, you inspired and guided one of the best and most prestigious research centers dedicated to the study of Byzantium, Dumbarton Oaks. Icons and iconography, secular portraiture and imperial power, sainthood and nature, cross-cultural interactions, texts and their relationships to images, from the 4th to the 15th century and from England to North America and Asia Minor, and some of the themes that permeate the pages of your books and articles. You have written 9 books, co-authored 3, edited 9, and authored over 100 articles in peer-reviewed journals and edited volumes. Your work offers a profound understanding of the ways in which Byzantine ways of teaching, remembering, and preaching affected the visual arts. You have presented eloquence as pertinent to both speech and icons. You have addressed in a meaningful way the Byzantines and by extension, the Orthodox understanding of the natural world, not simply as an environment intended for human exploitation, but rather as the all-encompassing cosmos created and organized by God. You have explored the most distinct artistic medium of the Orthodox Church, the icon. Your book on images of saints and the theological and cultural mechanism through which they acquire their sanctity is an invaluable resource for anyone teaching about icons in secular universities as well as in seminaries. Your thorough knowledge of Orthodox hagiography and homiletics, as well as of the intricacies of Byzantine Greek, has aided you in painting a thorough picture of the now lost civilization, which is at the core of the Orthodox Church today. There is perhaps no theme in Byzantine art history which you have not discussed in some way. From the humble medium of painted ceramics to the glittering mosaics of the Middle Byzantine churches, your work has paved the way for the multifaceted discipline of Byzantine studies. For nearly 50 years, scholars from various nationalities and specialties have been inspired by your publications, have been in dialogue with your ideas. Therefore, in thanksgiving to God for your teaching and scholarship, and in gratitude for your gentle presence and genuine love for your students and colleagues, it is the distinct honor and privilege of the Board of Trustees and the faculty of Vladimir Seminary, by unanimous decision and by the power vested in them by the Board of Regents of the State of New York, to bestow upon you, Dr. Henry Maguire, Doctor of Arts, honoris causa. now is your turn to teach us and to share with us your ideas on a very, very interesting topic. The title is here in front of me, Heaven to Earth, Earth to Heaven, Neoplatonic Theology and the Art of Byzantine Churches. Dr. Maguire.
Well, first, I must say that I'm honored and touched by the receipt of this doctorate, which came to me as a complete surprise. And it is really a pleasure to be here on this beautiful campus with such a congenial and collaborative faculty to give the Schmemann lecture. And since it has been suggested that I speak about theology, I have chosen as my topic the reification of Neoplatonic theology in medieval Byzantine art. So scholars have paid considerable attention. Okay, sorry, I have to interrupt for a little technical. Okay, thank you. So scholars have paid some attention to the influence of Neoplatonic ideas on early Byzantine architecture, such as the great 6th century church of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, which you see on the screen. But much less attention has been paid to the impact of Neoplatonism on the art of later Byzantine churches, those which dated to the period after the iconoclastic crisis of the 8th and 9th centuries. And so this evening we should be looking at some of these medieval churches in the light of Neoplatonic theology, using as our guide the voices of contemporary Byzantines who saw and used these buildings. So we begin with the Catholicon of the monastery of Hosios Loukas in Greece, which was constructed in the first half of the 11th century. And here, the entire interior gleams with marbles or with mosaics. The whole floor is spread with colored marbles, either in the form of large square or rectangular slabs, or in the form of opus sectile, that is, small pieces of stone arranged in geometrical patterns. And on the right, you see a detail of an opus sectile pattern from the pavement of the nave, which is composed of shapes such as circles, squares, and triangles, cut from multicolored stones. The walls of the building also are completely sheathed with plaques of colored marble. Further up, the vaults and arches of the church are covered with shining mosaics composed of small glass tesserae in which the backgrounds are predominantly gold. In the lower vaults, we can see images of Christ's incarnation. First, he sits as a baby on the lap of his mother in the apse, and then he is shown living his life as a man in the vault supporting the dome. And on the right is a detail of his baptism by St. John in the River Jordan. Finally, in the central dome at the summit of the church, there was once a portrait of Christ looking down from heaven. The mosaic that originally filled the central dome at Hosios Loukas no longer survives. However, a somewhat later church at the monastery of Daphne outside of Athens still preserves its dome mosaic in all its splendor. Here, the golden light of heaven surrounds an imposing bust of Christ Pantocrator, who is encircled by a rainbow of light against a luminous background of shining tesserae. Lower down, in the drum of the dome, we find his servants, the prophets, who are illuminated both by gold and by the windows between which they stand, as they transmit his word from heaven to earth. The scheme of decoration that we see in these medieval Byzantine churches differs from that of most earlier churches in Byzantium, those churches constructed between the 5th and 7th centuries. In the first place, the early buildings were usually basilican in form, with long naves, wooden roofs, and without central domes, as you see here in the 5th century basilica of the Achiropietos in Thessaloniki. Secondly, although some splendid marble pavements survive in churches from the early period, most of the surviving floors were tessellated, that is, composed of small, regularly sized stone cubes. Often these early tessellated floors depicted the terrestrial world through images of animals or plants, or else personifications of entities such as the months and the seasons. In some cases, these floor mosaics were laid out in a map-like composition, depicting the Earth surrounded by the ocean. In late antique cosmography, the world frequently was visualized as a central landmass centered on the Mediterranean, which was surrounded by an encircling sea. And we can see such a composition in the Basilica of Thyrsos at Tegea in Arcady, which probably dates to the end of the 5th century. As shown in the plan on the screen, the whole of the nave of this church was carpeted with a great mosaic, which had a rectangular central field surrounded by a border composed of a series of octagons. These octagons contained a variety of marine creatures, such as dolphins, octopuses, and shellfish, as you can see on the right. This marine life represented the ocean. In the central rectangle, which is enclosed by the water evoked in the octagon, we find the earth portrayed through representations of the 12 months. Each one is personified in the form of a bust holding his attributes, such as August, whom you see here clutching a melon and an eggplant. At the four corners of the central rectangle are personifications of the 4 rivers of paradise, which were believed to flow out of the terrestrial paradise to become the principal rivers of our world. Here you see the river Tigris holding up an overflowing vase. In the case of the church at Tegea, it is obvious that the pavement was intended to evoke the world of terrestrial nature, which was displayed in a map-like composition. Less obvious, however, is the idea that the medieval floors of opus sectile, such as we saw at Hosius Lucas, also were intended to evoke terrestrial creation, but in an abstract, non-figural way. This interpretation is suggested by the ekphrasis, or literary descriptions, of the medieval churches in Constantinople that served as models for the somewhat later medieval buildings in Greece. Although these 9th and 10th century churches in the capital no longer survive, we can still recreate them in our minds through the words of contemporary observers. It is clear from these descriptions that the polychromy of opus sectile pavements was intended to represent the colorful variety of earthly creation. Byzantine authors invariably referred to these floors in terms evoking nature. They said that the opus sectile pavements represented the earth, or its meadows full of flowers, or its rivers, or the sea. For example, we have a couple of vivid descriptions of churches in Constantinople penned by an emperor, Leo VI the Wise, who reigned from 886 to 912. And here on the upper left, you see the portrait of Leo on an enameled crown now in Venice. A facet of the emperor's wisdom was his practice of delivering highly rhetorical and sometimes almost incomprehensible sermons, in one of which he describes a church newly built by his father-in-law, Stylianos Zaoutzis. This building no longer survives, but its floor must have resembled the still extant opposectile pavement in the 10th century church of the Theotokos at Hosios Loukas, which adjoins the Catholicon. You can see the pavement of the Theotokos church and the detail of its border on the screen. This is how Leo describes the similar floor of the church built by Stylianos Zaoutzis in Constantinople. He declares, "The pavement is covered all over with the mingled and various colors of flowers. In places, the surface is suffused by white. In others, the white is framed by a composition of other colors, consisting of multicolored stones cut into small pieces, and this in turn is surrounded by purple slabs, as if by rivers. The latter, too, are enclosed by a composition imitating the variegated flowers of the earth." And then Leo continues with a flight of fancy. "If bees were to happen to come there, they would seem to me to take delight in the flowers and to hasten to make honey from the flowers of the pavement." By contrast, Leo says that the beauties of the upper part of the church are all made of mosaic smeared with gold. Here he describes mosaics similar to those that we can still see at Daphne. There was an imposing bust of Christ in the central dome, surrounded lower down by the prophets, and finally, scenes of the Incarnation, as you can see here. So, for Leo the Wise, the lower parts of the church represented terrestrial creation. For him, the polychromy of opus sectile, even if it looks completely abstract to us, evoked flowery fields, and the larger slabs evoked rivers portrayed in marble. The upper parts of the church, however, housed images of Christ and his servants, all shining with gold. But this was more than a simple contrast of earth below and heaven above, for it was also an expression of Neoplatonic ideas which had been disseminated in Byzantine Christianity through the works of the highly influential writer Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. These texts were attributed to a learned Athenian who was a disciple of St. Paul. In fact, Pseudo-Dionysius probably wrote around the year 500, and he was certainly deeply influenced by pagan Neoplatonic philosophers such as Plotinus and Proclus. His theology describes a mystical hierarchy in which the material world, characterized by variety, reflects the light emanating from the one, the divine unity. In the words of Pseudo-Dionysius, and I quote, "Light comes from the good and is an image of this archetypal good. The goodness of the transcendent God reaches from the highest and most perfect forms of being to the very lowest. Divine light," he says, "never abandons its own proper nature or its own interior unity, and it grants to lower creatures the power to rise up so that they may, toward itself, and unifies them by way of its own simplified unity." Pseudo-Dionysius specifies that the living creatures of air, earth, and sea, as well as plants and even lifeless matter, are among the lower forms that the One enlightens with its rays. The thought of Pseudo-Dionysius had an immediate impact. Already in the second quarter of the 6th century, Hypatius, the Archbishop of Ephesus, used the Dionysian hierarchy to defend Christian art against its critics. Speaking of the material adornment of the sanctuaries of churches, he said, "We conceive that some people are led by this artwork toward the intelligible beauty, and from the abundant light in the sanctuaries to the intelligible and immaterial light. As Ernst Kitzinger pointed out over 40 years ago, the thought of Pseudo-Dionysius provided a justification for the deployment of images of the natural world on the floors of churches, even if these subjects could be seen as a lowly reflection of divine splendor. In order to understand the role played by Neoplatonism in later medieval Byzantine art and writing and art, we turn now to a key figure of the 10th century, namely the poet and rhetorician John Geometres. For almost all of his adult career, John Geometres was an officer in the Byzantine army, but at the end of his life, he had some connection with the Kyros monastery in Constantinople, possibly as a monk or as a member of an associated confraternity. He wrote several poems describing buildings and works of art. The poems are not easy to read because the writing of Geometres is often characterized by density of thought allied with obscurity of expression, both of these features being considered virtues in Byzantine rhetoric. Typical of John's writing are 3 short epigrams, which may describe a red-colored vessel made of crystal or glass. Perhaps the object was similar in its effect of luminosity to the 10th century vessel now known as the Chalice of the Patriarchs, which is kept in the treasury of the Church of San Marco in Venice. This cup, which you see on the screen, incorporates a bowl carved from translucent red and white sardonyx into a Byzantine gilded silver mount that frames glass enamels with portraits of the saints. While it is not clear from the verses exactly what kind of vessel the poet is referring to, what is not in doubt is his use of Dionysian language and concepts to describe it. The poem can be translated as follows. The light of the visible sun shines from crystals. The divine intelligences pour down through them reflections of the divinely operating light. The crystals are mirrors of the light of the sun. But the divine intelligences are mirrors of the one who has created the sun. You are formed of bright red crystal, like mirrors of light or flames of fire. Here the poet is plainly invoking the Dionysian hierarchy of light, leading up from the physical light of the sun to the angels, and ultimately to the divine light of the one, and leading down to the earthly crystals below. Similar concepts appear in a somewhat longer poem by John Geometres, which does indeed have a known subject, for its title labels it as a description of the 5th century church of the Studios monastery in Constantinople. This building survives, but as you can see in the photograph on the screen, it is now a restored ruin. John's description, once again, demonstrates that in his time, in the 10th century, the marbles of the lower part of a Byzantine church were considered to represent terrestrial nature in distinction to heaven, which was evoked by the golden light of the vaults above. John Geometres describes the marble columns that carried the nave arcades, which still survive, as well as the marble pavement, which survives, but which may have been restored, and he also describes the glass mosaics of the apse vault, which have been completely lost. Geometres says that the apse vault above the sanctuary depicted Christ accompanied by cherubim and seraphim, by the Virgin, and by St. John the Baptist, the patron saint of the monastery. This description is matched by several apses in the cave churches of Cappadocia in Turkey, which preserve frescoes depicting Christ enthroned between his mother and John the Baptist. These compositions must have resembled the lost mosaic in the church in Constantinople, and they may indeed have been inspired by it, as Warren Woodfin has already written. Here on the right, for example, we see the 11th century apse of the Karanlık Kilise, or Dark Church, in the Goreme Valley of Cappadocia, showing Christ flanked by the Virgin and the Forerunner. As for the Opus Sectile pavement in the Studios Basilica, it is possible that the composition as it survives today, the one that you see in the drawing on the screen, dates to the 11th or even the 13th century, and is thus later than the poem by Geometries. However, it is clear from the poet's description that the pavement he saw also was created from gleaming pieces of variegated marble, similar to what exists now. John Geometries starts his description by comparing the shining marble floor to a sea, adding that the columns of the nave arcade, together with their once gleaming white architraves, were like snow melting into its waters. I quote, "The brightness and whiteness of these columns and the charm of their many flashes of color empty below like a bright stream of melting snow, flowing somehow without sound onto the glistening stones of the pavement as if into another sea." Then the poet changes his metaphor, using the familiar image to identify the variegated stones in the pavement as the earth. "But observe, if you will," he says, "the earth itself and the things of the earth, the variety of their colors and the beauty of the depictions. Here is painted another meadow, wrought from art, decked with flowers that wither not with time." From the description of the marbles that represent the terrestrial world, Geometries turns to the golden mosaics in the now lost semidome of the apse. Here he contrasts the variety of the created world at the bottom with the single light of the one, the unity invoked by Pseudo-Dionysius at the top. "See," he says, "the golden section of a sphere above, flashing forth with a great light, where every color of mosaic cube comes together as if to bring about one framed body among the stars, or hanging, full of light, as if the whole breadth of the sky was illuminated by one single star of all colors. Take pleasure in seeing the cosmos in this way, in all its beauty." The poem goes on to describe the images of Christ, the Virgin, John the Baptist, and of the celestial being. Finally, Geometries concludes by declaring that the building combines the two worlds, earthly and spiritual. But if indeed there was some mixture of opposites, of all the cosmos below and of the things above, it is here, and let it now be called only the place of beauties, as is fitting for mortals. In summary, John's ekphosis of the Studios Church proceeds from the polychromy of its marble pavement and columns, with their glistening brightness and flashes of color, to the one great light of its golden semidome. But even while earth and heaven are separated by variegation of color below and by unity above, they are still linked by the hierarchy of lights that they share. Before we leave John Geometries, we will look at one more of his poems, which he composed toward the end of his life. The poem is a short description of the church of the Kyros monastery with which he was then associated. The Kyros monastery is probably to be identified with the complex now known as the Kalendahane Cami in Istanbul. The church that John would have used when he was attached to the monastery no longer survives, as another church replaced it at the end of the 12th century. However, excavation beneath the paving of the later church has revealed parts of the nave pavement of the earlier church, which was the subject of John's poem. Although the preserved portion of the older floor is only in fragments, some of which are before you, they reveal the extraordinary richness of the original design, which was composed of opus sectile. On the right, we see the lower portion of a rectangular panel containing two circles that were originally linked in a guilloche. The work incorporates an impressive variety of materials, including geometrical shapes cut from giallo antico, green porphyry, cipollino rosso, and white marble. These elements are set in brightly colored glassy matrices of turquoise or red. When we consider that this is only a small part of the whole nave floor, we can imagine the overwhelming richness and variety of the entire composition. The poem starts with an invocation to the Virgin as the patron of the church. Virgin, Queen of all, your house is heaven. Then in the next line, the emphasis evokes the richness of the building's decoration, including, I think, the stones of the floor, which have been wrested from the ground. Quote, nevertheless, it presents the foremost spoils from the chambers of the earth. And then finally, in the last line, the poet introduces the notion of hierarchy, comparing the church and its marbles to a ladder reaching up to heaven. You, O Virgin, have set up a well-wrought ladder from earth to the orbit of heaven. Even if the Studios Church and the original church of the Kyros Monastery no longer survive in their entirety, we can gain a better impression of what Geometries was describing from the comparatively well-preserved churches of Greece, which are slightly later than the composition of his poems. As you have seen, in the Catholicon of Hosius Lucas, the decoration can be divided into two zones. The lower zone encompasses the opus sectile floor, together with the marble revetments of the lower walls and piers, which together represent the diversity of the earth. The upper zone encompasses the golden images in the vaults, depicting the incarnation of Christ and his rule from heaven. In the detail on the right, you see the mosaic of the Virgin silhouetted against a brilliant gold background in the apse. At Hosius Lucas, as in the Studios Basilica, the polychromatic marbles of the lower parts of the church reflected the shining gallery of sacred images in the upper vaults. The church, in the words of the poem, is a ladder leading up from the muted gleam of the earthly stones below to the more brilliant light of the heavenly orbit above. The importance of light in Neoplatonic mysticism may help to explain why opus sectile came to be preferred over tessellated mosaics as a medium for paving churches in the Middle Ages. As you've seen in the old churches of the 5th to 7th centuries, the tesserae of the pavements often were arranged into figural compositions evoking the world of nature. These compositions on the early floors were made of small cubes of unpolished stone and brick. They were not composed of the glinting glass tesserae that were employed for mosaics higher up in the church on the upper walls and vaults. Since the tesserae of the early pavements were made of matte materials, they did not give out light, but rather tended to absorb it. We can see how the old tessellated floor mosaics absorbed light in this portrayal of July from Tegea. Here, light is represented as shining into the image to model the arms and shoulders of the brawny farm worker who personifies the month. But medieval pavements on the right were composed of opus sectile, such as those at Hosius Lucas, and these were composed of larger pieces of polished stones, such as marble, which do not absorb, but rather reflect light, albeit not with the same brilliance as glass tesserae. The intarsia floors reflected back the gleam of the mosaics in the vaults above, and thus they became the perfect embodiment of the Neoplatonic hierarchy of lights, shining from the earth below as a more muted reflection of greater splendor above. This vertical exchange of light was associated by the Byzantines with prayer, which both reflected the desire of the faithful on earth and was answered by the response that descended from heaven. We find this idea expressed in an anonymous poem which describes a church pavement commissioned by the Empress Zoe between 1028 and 1034, when she was married to Romanos III. Here you can see mosaic portraits of Zoe and the last of her husbands, Constantine IX, in Hagia Sophia. The pavement described in the poem was in a building in Constantinople that housed a famous icon of Christ Antiphonites, or Christ who responds, to whom Zoe paid particular attention in her devotions. As a consequence, the floor was extremely rich, for it was inlaid not only with porphyry, but also with silver. This work of art no longer exists, but by way of illustration, we can use another pavement that does survive, namely this 12th century opposectile floor in the nave of the Church of Santa Maria and Santo Donato at Murano in the lagoon of Venice. Although this pavement is Venetian rather than Byzantine, it was inspired by earlier floors in Constantinople. The poem devoted to the floor, commissioned by Empress Zoe, can be translated as follows. Desiring the beauty of your house and the dwelling place of your glory, O word, the Empress Zoe, whose consort is Romanos, adorns the spread out ground. She sets a gleaming porphyry-hued circle in the middle, like another disk of the light-bearing star, sending out a circle of bright rays, the flashes of silver and of stones, whose rays shine out together from the center and astound all with artistic skill. But, O highest one, give to these donors in return life and light and grace, together with the fulfillment of their supplications. What is described in this poem is almost a kind of gift exchange. It moves the thought of Pseudo-Dionysius from theological abstraction to the realm of personal piety and prayer. In return for the light reflected from the pavement, petitioners, including the Empress, will receive a greater light and attendant benefits bestowed by God. In this case, the light of the pavement is not only a means of ascent to God, but also a way to invoke the descent of light from above, not only a mystical hierarchy of lights, but also a more practical exchange of illuminations, of gift and counter-gift. The poem shows us that even in the gleaming stones of an opposectile floor, the Byzantines could find a means of reaching God, and he, in response, could reach down from heaven to touch their lives on earth. So, a change. In all of the churches that we've considered so far, their original decoration, beautiful though it was, has only survived in part, or in some cases, such as the apse of the Studios monastery, it has completely disappeared. In effect, we have had to piece together our understanding of the monuments from fragments. So let us close by looking at a medieval Byzantine church in which the paintings have survived almost in their entirety, and which presents us with a virtually complete expression of the Neoplatonic ideas that we have explored. The church that we shall visit is the Panagia to Arakos at Lagudara, a relatively small building hidden in a valley in the Troodos Mountains of Cyprus. The church is chiefly famous for its remarkable wall paintings, which are outstanding both for their aesthetic qualities and for their intellectual complexity. They are also unusual in that they're so beautifully preserved. Due to the protection provided by the wooden roof that covers the entire church, including its dome, the decoration of the church is for the most part complete, from the summit of the dome down to the dado at the floor. Once inside the church, the visitor feels completely surrounded by holy figures. In contemporary parlance, one would describe this as a total immersion experience. It is true that the frescoes at Lagudara, being painted on matte plaster, these frescoes cannot reflect light in the same way as the polished marbles and glass tesserae of richer churches, such as those at Hosios Loukas. Nevertheless, we shall see that in the Panagia to Arakos, light is evoked pictorially through the medium of paint. According to an inscription inside the church above its north entrance, the frescoes were completed in December of 1192 at the behest of the Lord Leon, a local magnate. The church was incorporated into a monastery that possibly was founded by Leon himself. He may have been buried in the western bay of the church, while his wife may have been laid to rest outside the church proper, adjacent to its western wall. Another inscription naming Leon and his father was painted on its south wall, framing a standing image of the Virgin Arachiotissa, who is shown holding her child and flanked by two angels holding the instruments of his passion. The words of the inscription record the founder's heartfelt pleas for the Virgin's intercession on behalf of himself and his entire family for safety in this life and salvation in the next. It reads in part, "For you alone, Virgin, are to be glorified, when supplicated in all your ways by your servants, to desire to grant them the salvation for which they yearn." These requests are reinforced by an urgent dialogue between the icons of the Virgin Eleusa and the responding Christ Antiphanites, who are portrayed on the piers on either side of the opening to the sanctuary. In the dialogue, which is painted on the Virgin's scroll on the left, she asks her son for the salvation of mortals, which, after his initial reluctance, Christ eventually grants. The decoration of the interior of the Panagia to Arakos recreates a kind of miniature cosmos reaching from earth to heaven. A dado runs around the base of the walls, containing a painted revetment composed of roundels imitating dark marbles, such as green verde antique and red porphyry. These stone medallions are framed by circular bands replicating white marble, inset with pieces of black stone in the form of small circular discs or radiating triangles. At Lagudara, these stones are fictive to the extent of paint simulating the veining in the marbles. This frescoed opus sectile took the place of shining revetments composed of real stones, which would have been more expensive. But their symbolism remains the same. Their abstract polychromy represents the variety of earthly creation as evoked in the Byzantine descriptions of intarsia floors that we considered earlier. In the Church of Lagudara, the paintings of the dado evoke gleaming marbles, which are the first rung of the ladder described by Geometres in his poem on the Kyros monastery. Immediately above the dado with its marbles, we come to the second rung, which is occupied by the earthly saints depicted on the lower walls. Here we see apostles, bishops, priests, deacons, monks, and other ascetics, including the stylites, who reached up to heaven as they sat upon their columns. The next level of painting, the third rung, covers the vaults of the sanctuary and nave, together with the upper walls embraced by their arches. This zone is devoted to scenes of the life of Christ on earth, that is, the story of God's incarnation, from the Annunciation of his birth to the dormition of his mother. The Annunciation occupies two of the pendentive vaults beneath the drum of the dome, halfway between earth and heaven. The two protagonists, the angel Gabriel and the Virgin, are painted in dialogue in the pendentives to the left and the right of the arch opening into the sanctuary. The separation of the two figures expresses the distance between heaven and earth that is bridged by the incarnation, which is reenacted through the Eucharistic rite offered in the sanctuary below. Raising our eyes higher to the drum containing the windows beneath the dome, we see there the prophets holding their scrolls, which transmit through their inscriptions the word of God from heaven to earth. This is the fourth rung of the ladder, where the seers of the Old Testament, their bodies animated by a dance-like energy, bestow the spiritual light of their messages on those below, just as the tall windows beside them give physical light. Some of the biblical quotations on their scrolls invoke the relationship between heaven and earth. Thus, the script held by Habakkuk on the right quotes from the third verse of the third book of his prophecies. God came out of Timam, his glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. Above, at the topmost level, Christ himself appears in a large circle at the crown of the dome, shown bust length, dressed in a vivid blue robe against a dark red ground, and holding the book of his word. Christ is framed by a circular band filled with chevrons colored red, blue, and white. As Slobodan Churches showed, this rainbow-like surround represents the light of heaven. The chevron border at La Gudera is a painted reproduction of works in multicolored glass tesserae, such as a brilliantly colored rainbow of red, green, and white that encircles the bust of Christ in the dome of the church at Daphne. The portrayal of Christ in these domes can be described in the words of a contemporary Byzantine author, Nicholas Mesorites, who wrote an ekphosis of a similar image of Christ, which was executed in mosaic in the central dome of the great church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople. In the words of Mesorites, this dome shows in pictured form the God-man Christ leaning and gazing out as though from the rim of heaven toward the floor of the church and everything in it. Wherefore, one can see in him, to use the words of the Song of Solomon, looking forth at the windows, leaning out as far as his navel through the lattice at the summit of the dome, like an earnest and vehement lover. In this startling simile of an earnest lover gazing down from a window at the center of the dome, we find a key to the understanding of the images. The frescoes express a hierarchy from earth to heaven, yet it is not a hierarchy that separates what is above from what is below. On the contrary, there is a constant communication, an ardent reaching downwards and upwards. The whole church is filled with a fervent interchange of voices. We hear from above the words of the angel Gabriel, of the prophets, and of Christ himself, which mingle with the petitions of the Virgin Eleusa flanking the sanctuary below, and with the pleas of the founder, Leon, inscribed low down on the south wall. At La Gudera, even in the medium of fresco, the painters invoked the Neoplatonic hierarchy of light, which reached from the gleaming colors of earthly stones to Christ looking forth earnestly from the shining orbit of heaven. At the same time, the interchange of illumination was accompanied by a chorus of voices, desiring below and responding above, a whole universe of light and sounds contained in the paintings of this church, small in size, but great in spirit. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Maguire. We have the time to take from the floor 2, 3 questions.
Thank you very kindly. It was a brilliant and illuminating lecture. I appreciate it very much, although not directly related, but indirectly, of course, it is. My question would be, I'm fascinated by the fate of two Byzantine churches and their sorry state in which one abides today, and that is the Church of Polyephetus, because it represents the very transition between coming from the West and going entirely toward the East in terms of iconography, art, decor, and so on. And I understand that it's in the state of complete ruins and reduced, and forgive my saying so publicly, but to a public latrine almost. And I understand that Dumbarton Oaks was very interested in one point in doing something with that church. And I wonder how far that's gotten. And the second is my great desire to find out what happened in my very meager trying to learn the same. The Church of the Apostles and what happened after the Church of the Apostles was brought down, and of course the Mosque of the Conqueror was built, and the tombs of the emperors and Constantine himself, and history seems to be very meager on that point. I wonder if you would have any information on that.
Well, to answer your second question first, the tombs from the Holy Apostles, they're not visible, obviously, on the site of the mosque, but some of the sarcophagi may be in the courtyard of the Archaeological Museum, the porphyry sarcophagi. So that being such a precious material, they were preserved, but not all of them. And I didn't catch which church you were referring to in the first, in Cyprus. The Polyeuctos, sorry. That, I don't know if you can visit it now. You used to be able to visit it. It was thoroughly excavated by Dumbarton Oaks, and the carved remnants of it also in the Archaeological Museum. But the site also could be visited. It's not a very, I must say, impressive site, because they just discovered the foundations, and there's still a lot of debate about exactly what the church above looked like. I somewhat suspect that the site is now closed, but I haven't been there for some time, so I wouldn't know for sure.
Other questions? If not, thank you again, Dr. Maguire. The second part of our evening is dedicated to mid-year commencement, and we have 3 students commencing tonight. The first degree is Master of Divinity, and I will read the formula that is written in front of me. By virtue of the authority vested in the Board of Trustees and the faculty of St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, by the Boards of Regents of the University of the State of New York, the degree of Master of Divinity is given to the Reverend Deacon Habib Caleb McGee. The next one is for the Master of Arts. And again, by virtue of the authority vested in the Board of Trustees and the faculty of St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, by the Board of Regents and of the University of the State of New York. The degree of Master of Arts is given to Mr. Christopher Michael Abdelad. And finally, the third one, by virtue of the authority vested in the Board of Trustees and the faculty of St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary by the Board of Regents of the University of the State of New York, the degree of Doctor of Ministry is given to the Very Reverend Alessandro Margheritino. I invite now Father Alessandro Margheritino to share with us his short remarks.
Your Beatitude, Your Grace, brothers and sisters. It is truly an honor to stand before you this evening as I complete the Doctor of Ministry program. This marks my second degree from this blessed institution. And I must confess that it's perhaps because I love being a student here so much that it took a bit longer to finish my project. Father Sturgis. Just the other day, my 7-year-old, with his wonderful directness, asked me, "What are you going to do with the doctorate? Can you retire now?" Great questions. I told him he should probably direct these excellent questions to the Metropolitan and then get back to me with the answers. People pursue the Doctor of Ministry program for various reasons: to challenge themselves academically, to enhance their ministry, to become better priests, chaplains, administrators, youth pastors, counselors, and so on. However, throughout this demanding journey, I've been continuously reminded of the foundational purpose of this formation: to become a better servant of Christ's Holy Church, irrespective of our specific ministry. And I guess this seemingly obvious reminder, which is, however, so easy to forget, is something that applies not only to DMIN students, seminarians in general, but to all those men and women who serve in the church. For my final project, I looked at the principle of sobornos applied to church administration. The idea of sobornos, conciliarity as it is often translated, is not one broadly agreed upon, and there are indeed varying interpretations and understandings, even among the Slavophiles themselves who are closely associated with it. One thing that is generally shared, however, is that sobornos compels us to venture beyond parochial, individualistic, and even selfish concerns and toward a more comprehensive vision of church life. In an inspiring address in Mayfield at the first All-American Sobor, St. Tichen, serving as our Archbishop here in America, emphasized this very point. I quote, "For my part, I would just like to say that in order for our work to be truly fruitful, we must be guided not so much by self-interest or personal advantage, but rather by what benefits our common work." In my project, I argue that church administration in its truest form embodies the paradox of the cross. And whether you serve in parish ministry, you teach at a seminary, or work for a missionary organization, we are all involved in church administration one way or another. And those who approach church administration seeking only efficiency, administrative excellence, power, while avoiding its sacrificial nature, fundamentally misunderstands its purpose. Just as Christ embraced his cross, those involved in church administration must embrace its challenges, difficulties, and moments of suffering and integral as integral to their service, truly an exercise of kenosis. The cross of administration demands patience in conflict, humility in decision-making, and perseverance through criticism and misunderstanding. It requires administrators to die to their own preferences, ambitions, and comfort for the sake of the community's well-being. I'm profoundly grateful to the Lord for this opportunity to complete the second degree in my beloved seminary that has been a true nourishing mother, an alma mater in its fullest sense, providing that formation that I can employ in both pastoral ministry and church administration. I'm grateful to the exceptional professors, and especially to Father Sturgis, our program director, and Father John, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, who served as my advisor, who have guided me with wisdom and patience. My heartfelt thanks to His Beatitude, Metropolitan Tijan, for his support and his blessing, and the former chancellors of the Orthodox Church in America, Father Alexander Garclaves, Father John Gillians, and Father Alexander Rentel, with whom I've enjoyed close relationship for many years and that I have the blessing to have as my mentors to this day. I'm grateful to my cohort, one of the best parts of the program. And finally, and most importantly, I must express my deepest gratitude to my wife, Anna, and our children, Luca and Nicholas. Their patience, understanding, love, and sacrifices made this possible. Thank you.
Congratulations, Father Alessandro. We are just about to open a PhD in Orthodox Christian Studies, so the third degree is possible. It's now my honor to invite His Beatitude Metropolitan Tijan for closing remarks. Your Beatitude.
They're long enough so you can sit. Christ is in our midst. As we come to the conclusion of these mid-year commencement exercises, I offer just a few expressions of gratitude and concluding remarks, which will be focused on the three holy hierarchs we commemorate today: St. Basil the Great, St. Gregory the Theologian, and St. John Chrysostom. Among the first, I offer my thanks to His Grace, Bishop Irenei of the Eastern America Diocese of the Serbian Orthodox Church, not only for his presence with us this evening, but for celebrating that this morning at the Divine Liturgy. Although we did not have the triadic completeness of three bishops for the feast of the three hierarchs, it is always a joy to give liturgical expression to the unity of the Orthodoxy here in North America through the celebration of the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. Your Grace's presence offers a visible sign of this unity, and we thank you for your contribution to St. Vladimir's commitment to pan-Orthodox collaboration and service. On behalf of the faculty and the Board of Trustees, I once again congratulate Dr. Henry Maguire on his reception of the degree Doctor of Arts honoris causa, and for providing us with an engaging and enlightening 42nd lecture in honor of Father Alexander Schmemann. It perhaps requires a certain degree of bravery for a renowned and well-spoken academic to venture onto the campus of an Orthodox theological seminary, especially on the day on which we honor St. Gregory the Theologian, whose words of theology unraveled the complex webs of orators, as we sing in his Troparion. I can, however, reassure you, Dr. Maguire, that your oratorical skills were wonderfully woven with a genuine knowledge of theology, and we are all grateful that your words have offered all of us a small thread of wisdom to add to the robe of orthodoxy woven from on high, given to us by St. Gregory. I also congratulate the mid-year class of 2024 for their academic achievements. Father Deacon Caleb Habib McGee for his Master of Divinity, Mr. Christopher Abdelahad for his Master of Arts, and Father Alessandro Margaretino for the Doctor of Ministry. As such, we have a trio of graduates on the Feast of the Three Hierarchs. May each of you, in your own unique ways, strive to emulate the model given to us by Saint Basil, whose proclamation went out into all the world, expounding the nature of creatures and ennobling the manners of men. Finally, almost finally, I offer my congratulations to all the members of the seminary community, the faculty, the staff, the seminarians and their families, the alumni, and the Board of Trustees. I offer these congratulations to all, but with particular reference to our interim president, Dr. Ionuț Alexandru Tudorie, through whose faithful oversight St. Vladimir Seminary has been navigating a period of transition in which the sacred work of the seminary has nevertheless continued unabated. It is thanks to the pastoral and academic formation of our seminarians. Thank you, Dr. Alex, and all who work with you for your dedication to this sacred task. Finally, as we depart in peace, I recall our attention back to the lecture we heard this evening, which brings to mind, first of all, the words of St. Paul to the Ephesians, referring to Christ, who says of him, "Who is it that ascended on high, but he that first descended to the lower regions, so that he might raise up all and grant gifts unto all." These gifts given to us can be found in the three hierarchs and all the saints, really, all the saints who stand for us as pillars linking heaven and earth, as we heard so beautifully expressed in a very concrete way in the lecture this evening. So may we all call to mind our Lord Jesus Christ, reflect on the lectures we have heard, and give glory to God for the sacred work that takes place here at St. Vladimir Seminary through the prayers and labors and sacrifices of all who are gathered here. And I thank you for coming, and we will close now with the prayer.